Hey, everybody. This is episode number one of The Sports File, a 35-year reboot. Quick introduction on what this podcast is going to be all about. What are some of the topics that we'll be discussing, and a little bit about myself. So I'll start first with who I am. My name is Sean Barkley. I live in Denver, Colorado. I've been proud to call Colorado home since the year 2001, when my wife and I relocated from the suburbs of Massachusetts outside of Boston to take some jobs out here and enjoy all the great qualities that Colorado has to offer with the great quality of life and the outdoor, beautiful outdoor scenery that we have here as well. Um, Raised three kids as well out here. Proud to say that they are our greatest accomplishment that by far that we've done together. But one of my hobbies has always been sports. And so, one of the things to understand about why the title first, I think it's the best way to break this down is why do I call this the Sports File, a 35-year reboot? Back when I was in high school, I actually, way back when, this was the year 1988, 1989. This is in the era of where local television was still a thing with community television through the local cable system within the small town that I grew up in. Myself and two other friends from high school had a show, and we called it the Sports File. And what we did on a weekly basis was just had a few topics of interest. It was all focused around at the time Boston sports scene, and kind of what our thoughts were. A little bit opinionated, but a little bit with some news as well, highlights, etc. And then I've always had this idea of relaunching it through the years. Our Sports File TV show lasted about 9 months, the length of my senior year in high school before we all went off to college. And I've always wanted to kind of, especially with the advent of podcasting now and where it's become such a new medium out there, is to kind of sort of go back to what I really love doing, and that's talking about sports. I always wanted to be kind of in communications, wanted to, an ideal job would have been for me to actually just sit around and talk about sports. And I took a different path in college, whole different career, but now where I'm kind of in my early 50s here and transitioning back to kind of what I love to really do, and that's just to talk about and watch sports. I thought this would be a great new adventure to take on, and hopefully we get some listeners out there as well. So that's kind of the 35-year reboot of what we're calling the Sports File. Some of the topics that I think we'll be covering here, that I'm going to cover here, will be more focused around what I prefer to watch. So I'm not going to cover all sports, but I'm going to cover the major ones. And for me, it's covering the local Denver sports scene. And I'll go over the teams in a little bit. We're going to actually talk a little bit about kind of national, what's happening on the national stage here in the U.S. for sports. And then I'd also, my side thing, my latest sports that I'm kind of super interested in as well is Premier League soccer, specifically the Tottenham Hotspurs out of London, England. So those will be kind of the topics that we'll be talking about on a weekly basis. And I'm going to really focus in on, for me, the sports that kind of I think move the needle out here. And first and foremost, if you live in Denver, Colorado, probably the biggest, sports team by far, and I could argue nationally as well, is the Denver Broncos football team, located in the AFC West. Denver Broncos have been around since 1960. They're proud to say that they're the only team that has actually sold out every single game from 1960 to present. So an incredible span of years where they've actually been able to sell out incredibly loyal fan base. The biggest joke around here when we first moved out here was if you want to get anything done on a Sunday, if you want to go to the mall or go grocery shopping, the perfect time to do it is when the Denver Broncos are playing because the stores will be empty. And I can absolutely attest to that this city really does revolve around the Denver Broncos. See their fan, like I talked about, their season ticket base, constantly selling out the stadium through even when they were early on not very good to kind of their mediocre years to winning three Super Bowls. So that'll be one of the topics. Football in the United States is king by far, as the number one sports. So we're going to talk a lot about kind of the Denver Broncos, kind of focusing in on, frequent past items. So if we think about like last year's season, the year before, you can see where I'm headed to this with the Russell Wilson saga to where do the Denver Broncos go from here? The next team I'm going to focus in on is the Denver Nuggets. Denver Nuggets, they are quickly have won the hearts of this city over really starting back to, in my eyes, they had some great teams back in the, I would say in the 80s. You think about Dikembe Mutombo, Alice English, some great players. But really, for me, when it took off was when they were able to draft Carmelo Anthony. And since then, they've been consistently, one of the better teams within the NBA, especially in the Western Conference, I would say. And then they've had some ups and downs, but really, they really turned the corner by getting Nikola Jokic, right? Who I would argue is the best basketball player on the planet at this point. So we'll talk a lot about the Nuggets. Kind of, we can recap last season, kind of where they are today, and kind of projections into the future, what that might look like for them. I'll talk a little bit about the Colorado Avalanche. I would say, hockey is an interesting sport. I would say it's a smaller marketplace, but the Avalanche fans out here are really into it. The Avalanche, historically since I've been here, we had some great teams early on. You think about the Joe Sakic, Peter Forsberg, Adam Foote, Milan Hajduk era, where they won Stanley Cups when Ray Bourque came out here from the Boston Bruins till 2 years ago when they won the Stanley Cup with their kind of young core of players. So we'll spend a little bit of time on the Avalanche. I mean, I think the latest news, obviously, about them, why it's a focus, is clearly they're positioning themselves for a Stanley Cup run. They recently completed a series of trades where, if you're thinking about sort of a gambling analogy, right? They've kind of put all of their chips in one basket and are ready to try to move forward and do something and make a move within the playoffs at the trade deadline. And the last topic I'm going to be covering on a weekly basis is really focused on soccer, as we would call it here in the U.S. The rest of the world would call it football. Um, Soccer has really taken off, and I attribute this all to my kids getting me interested in. Years ago, my youngest son is a huge Barcelona fan. My other son is a huge Real Madrid fan, so they've got a natural rivalry there. And I started sitting down and watching soccer games with them on weekends. Historically, games were always on a Saturday for league play. And at one point, they're like, "Dad, you need to come up with a team." And so, one of my favorite players in teams, because I've always had a curiosity with soccer. Think about England at the World Cup stage, right? National stage. England was always kind of a team I always really enjoyed watching, dating back to the David Beckham years till the future. And one of my favorite players on England as of late has been Harry Kane. And so it was very natural for me to figure out when I was trying to pick a team, since I was essentially forced into doing it, was to pick the Tottenham Hotspurs out of London because Harry Kane had been a Spurs player for quite some time. He was what they would call one of his own. He kind of came up through their system and is a huge star in today's game. So we'll talk a lot about the Tottenham Hotspurs. I watch them on a weekly basis. We can have some opinions, hopefully, just to educate the great sport of soccer. I think it's just a phenomenal sport. It's by far on the world stage the number one sport. If you were to think about, arguably looking at who are popular sports athletes, for example, Tom Brady has, let's call it 15 million followers on Instagram. Recently retired, probably the GOAT of quarterbacks within the National Football League. Well, someone like Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi have close to 500 million Instagram followers. So it just goes to show you the reach on the world stage of soccer. And then we'll just hit maybe some curiosity topics. I'm open for feedback, obviously. Comment once this is published. Let me know what you would like to chat about. I'm going to do some current events, talk a little bit about what's happening in Denver with the, especially as I'm trying. My wife and I like to go out and our quote unquote date night is going to various restaurants. So I'll talk about what some of my favorite restaurants are. I'd be curious to see what some of yours are. And then current, like I was saying earlier, current topics around what's happening here in Colorado. So that is my introduction to what this Sports File 35-year reboot podcast is going to be all about. I'm going to be publishing this on a weekly basis. Still haven't landed on the best day yet. I think that'll evolve once I really sit down and focus on. But think about today's episode more about is I want you to understand kind of what I'm going to be talking about. And you're going to be able to listen to this podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts in the future. And I just kind of want to have fun with this. I want to pick it up, make it a hobby, and see where it kind of goes from there. So, even though this is episode number one, as I introduced it, the real first episode where we get into the topics will begin next week. And I look forward to talking to you then. This has been the Sports File, a 35-year reboot.